deficits that the state is facing, at least from the revenue side. And they have different causes, and therefore they need different solutions. And this is a part of a presentation I made to the House Select Committee on Fiscal Stability, trying to show them that you have to distinguish the causes of the problems and come up with different answers to these two problems. So this is the first one. This is the fall off in sales tax revenue because of the recession. This is what's been making the headlines every month, because you can see colors aren't quite as clear as I'd like, but the red line at the bottom is current year sales tax revenue to the state month to month, because that's how you have to do is compare. Obviously, December's a high month, so you want to compare December one year to the next. Well, you can see, I think, in February, the blue line that's 09 fell below the whatever color that looks like, gray line for 08. And that's when you started getting headlines about sales tax revenue falling. What they meant is it was bringing in less this month than it did the same month the year before. And we went 14 straight months where the sales tax was bringing in less than the same month the prior year, and in some cases was double-digit percentages, 12 and 14% below the same month in the prior year. Now, in the last couple of months, you can see the red line has just barely gotten above the blue line, so above the blue line. So sales tax revenue is now bringing in the same as or percent more than it was the year before, but it's still below where it was 2 years before, still below the 08 level. And I didn't want to clutter up the graph with more lines, but I think we may be below the 07 level month to month also. So this is a big problem. You remember the sales tax is more than half of state tax revenue, and the other things, the alcohol and cigarette and gasoline are similar to this. So the state has really been hit hard because of its reliance on consumption taxes by the recession, but hopefully the recession will be over someday and growth will resume. So what we need is a source of money, a single sort of one-time source of money to plug the hole until the economy recovers. So that's the first deficit. Now if we can go on to the next one. This is what's now being called the structural deficit, and this is the long-term continuing problem that the legislature created for itself in 2006. Now what happened is there was a school finance lawsuit that was, the Supreme Court ruled in 2005. And actually I'll take a minute to explain this. What happened is there was a statutory cap on how high school tax rates could be, their maintenance and operation rates to pay for annual expenses. And it was for most districts, $1.50 per $100 of property value. The problem was that most school districts were at or just about at that limit, and they were stuck because they couldn't go any higher, and they were just totally dependent on the state to give them more money. They had lost local control. And so they went to court, and they said essentially, the state won't let us go above $1.50. We can't go any below $1.50 because we need to raise that much money just to do what the state is requiring us to do, have enough kids pass the tests and not drop out of school. And it is equivalent to the state telling us you must tax at $1.50, which is essentially a statewide property tax. And there is a provision in the Texas Constitution from the late 1970s prohibiting a state property tax. We used to have one. It was phased out and then was finally prohibited about 30 years ago. So the Supreme Court agreed, said that the current school finance system was essentially a state property tax, and that school districts had to be given, the magic words were, meaningful local discretion to set their own tax rates so they wouldn't all be jammed up against the ceiling like that. Now there was lots you could do. You could of course say, well, you don't have to graduate all your kids. Or you could just say, well, tax to $1.60, $1.70, we don't care. Those, for obvious reasons, for better or for worse, were not what they decided to do. That what they had to do is lower the tax rates that school districts needed to levy and then give them room to rise it back up again. And the feeling was giving them 15%, or in other words, 10% cushion, would be enough meaningful discretion. Instead, the legislature cut them by a third, cut them by 50 cents, from $1.50 to $1 in most cases. So a big local property tax cut. It was very attractive to them politically, but they had to promise the school districts that they would be no worse off if they couldn't collect that much in local property taxes. The state promised them they'd make up the difference. And to make up the difference, the state changed the franchise tax, it created that margins tax I described, and they raised the cigarette tax by $1 a pack, which was very significant. Had been 41 cents, it's now $1.41 for a pack of cigarettes. The problem is it didn't come even close to making up the difference in what school districts were no longer being able to collect. And these are the numbers. If you look at the column 0809, that's the last budget, not the one we're in now, but that's the one that's completed, so we know how it turned out. First column there, the 506 fiscal note, that's from May 06, when they were in special session. The fiscal note is, the estimate of the effect of a tax bill that's attached to the bill. They had it on their desks in front of them before they voted. They were expecting the franchise tax to bring in $6.8 billion, the tobacco tax to bring in 1.4. There's another couple of other small changes. It's going to add up $8.3 billion. Now the problem was the property taxes that the schools were no longer collecting over the course of the biennium was more than $14 billion. So they built in a hole already of nearly $6 billion. Now as it happened for 06, 07, they had cash on hand, so they could cover the hole that way. And then they continued to cover the hole. We'll talk about how they did it, but they've run out of ways to fill in the hole. So they created this problem for themselves knowingly to begin with, and then on top of that, the franchise tax totally failed to bring in the amount of new money they expected. Instead of that $6.8 billion, it brought in $3 billion. Partly because of the recession, partly because they totally underestimated how large the deductions would be for cost of goods sold. So now, instead of a $6 billion hole, it's a $9 billion hole, and that hole will not go away. Unlike the recession, which hopefully will end sometime soon, this hole is going to be there in each and every budget going forward. That's why it's called the structural deficit. It is built in to the revenue structure of the state now. And so it's going to take some structural change in the revenue system to finally heal this problem. And then you can see for the current budget, we don't have final numbers yet, but it's a similar amount, more than $9 billion. So this is an ongoing problem that's going to take a little while to fix. I doubt we obviously are not going to be able to do everything at once in the coming session or special sessions as they may turn out to be. But this is lurking in the background. So, scared?